All right. Welcome back to the SVHS podcast. If I sound under the weather today, expect that because I'm just a little congested. But today we've got a special guest on today. This is Jeff Martindale. Also happens to be my uncle. So just introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah, Jeff Martindale. I went to Sonoma High and graduated in 1981. Was born and raised in Sonoma, a place that I'm really happy to come back to after 37 years of being away. Left when I was 18, joined the Army, which was not the usual route coming out of Sonoma and back in 1981. And eventually went to West Point and spent a career of about 27 years in the Army, and retired as a colonel, and then eventually went to work taking the lessons that we learned fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places to the business world, which is what I do now with a company called McChrystal Group.
All right, so just tell us a little bit about your path from high school to West Point.
Yeah.
And maybe piece in together what you did in the barn talk too.
Sure. When I was your age, Andrew, I was nothing like you, right? You've got everything going, getting ready to go to American University, great student, athlete. I was much more of the athlete, much less of the student, and really didn't have any idea what I wanted to do after high school. I spent a lot of time in high school having a lot of fun, and my priorities weren't really academic. They were as much as work and sports and just having great friendships and enjoying growing up here in Sonoma. I had some options of going off to junior colleges and maybe some smaller colleges, but really realized in my senior year that I wanted to do something completely different. And during that time, I grew up in kind of the shadow of post-Vietnam. The country is a little bit down on ourselves, I think, and I felt like I could go off and do something important. There was also an Iranian hostage crisis and hostage rescue that was a failure. It was kind of a part of my growing up in high school. And I had a number of relatives, my Uncle Pete in World War II and a number of others that had served in the Army. And it interested me mainly for the adventure side of it and the fact that I could go off and I can learn a completely new set of skills in becoming a combat medic and a lab technician, is what I signed up for, and do it in a totally different place in Germany. So I signed up, my contract actually said I was going to go to Germany for 3 years. And I felt like that would give me the tools that I needed later on to do whatever I wanted to do, whether that was go off to college or go work in that field or even stay in the military. Had no idea what West Point was, other than it was our most difficult drill on the football field under Coach McAllister at that time. And so I equated West Point with difficulty and hardship, but something really important. And after I'd served for a while in the Army in Germany, I was really good at what I did. And I had a couple of commanders that said, hey, you should probably go back to school, go to college, or go into the Special Forces, one of those two. And when I heard about a program they had for really good soldiers to get into West Point through a presidential appointment, I applied for that. And thankfully was accepted to that. And from that point on, I was pretty motivated and took the lessons that I learned from really being at the bottom of a big hierarchy as a private. And during the barn talk, we showed some pictures of that, and took that into how to become the best leader I could be within the Army while I went to West Point and then thereafter. So,
all right.
Hope that answers that question.
Yeah.
So what I learned really was you got to learn how to work hard, and you have to be motivated by certain things to get really good at anything, right? And I wasn't at the point to do that in high school, but I certainly got to that point.
Yeah. So let's see. Next on this list. Oh, that's a big jump. um,
So I can take you through the discussion we had really at the barn talk, if you want.
yeah,
We, at
that'd
this
probably
point,
be
we
good.
go into, what was it like at West Point and so on. I think we spent a lot of time on that. The more, I think, important story is after I got out of West Point and became an officer in charge of a lot of people, progressed up through the ranks and went through the most elite parts of the Army, which is what I was always attracted to, and wound up in the Rangers, U.S. Army Rangers, and the Ranger battalions, and learned how to do the hardest things there were to do in the Army, right?
Right.
And I was in charge of people that were given the most difficult missions over and over again. And we thought before 9/11 that we were by far the best on the planet and that we can continue to operate like that in any war we were ever going to be in. And we thought we validated that in Desert Storm when I first fought in combat. And we were able to basically defeat an army in about 4 days, right? And that was a good example of an army that was trained and operating in a big hierarchy with the genius at the top and very functionally sound experts all the way down. Everyone knowing their piece of this huge mission and having the genius of plan that was executed perfectly at the bottom, right?
Right.
And we really didn't have to change much from our plan, which was the only time I ever saw that in combat. And we took some wrong lessons from that. And the leaders that were there during Desert Storm spent the rest of their careers trying to lead organizations by being the genius at the top and expecting people to execute with perfection all the way down. And there was really no reverse coming from the bottom up to change that genius plan when things were different at the bottom.
Yeah.
Right. And so, when 9/11 happened, I found myself with this really elite organization now in Afghanistan, but now we're not fighting a hierarchy, right? We're fighting a loosely connected network, right? In Al Qaeda and with Al Qaeda in Iraq eventually.
Yeah.
That was enabled by all the new technology that we couldn't have foreseen. I mean, we thought we had all the best technology, but when cell phones became as ubiquitous as they were there, and an enemy could use those to make quick decisions in seconds, in minutes, and not days, we found ourselves working in this hierarchy with the most elite teams at the bottom with SEAL Team 6 and the Rangers and Delta Force. We found ourselves too slow because we weren't working together. We were really tribal, and each team wanted to be the best and wanted to get the most of the Al Qaeda leadership and be known as the best organization, vice working together at the bottom in order to get there, right? And so we had to just finally realize that we weren't winning and that we were going to have to take what we were doing and change the way we were operating in this big hierarchy and completely change it so that we were operating more like a network within that hierarchy.
Right.
Okay.
So kind of just like changing from sort of a pyramid structure to a web.
Exactly. But we couldn't change the structure. And it goes back to what I was saying with the Iranian hostage crisis. Coming out of that crisis, they did a big after-action review, and Congress mandated that the structure of the counter-terrorist force for the U.S. was going to have a headquarters and the Joint Special Operations Command at the top, and it would be a standing task force of the SEALs and Rangers and Delta Force, so it would never be an ad hoc team thrown together from all the services like that one was.
Yeah.
And the good things about a hierarchy is that you do get a lot of stability when it comes to training people. and a lot of predictability in how the organization can operate,
Yeah.
right? The downside is it can be too slow because decisions tend to go all the way up to the top and all the way back down into another silo
Mm-hmm.
of the organization. And so we had to act like a network within the structure that we were given, which is really key when it comes to going into and doing this work with a business. Because the last thing you want to be coming in from the outside as a consultant is someone coming in to cut heads or change the structure of the organization.
Right.
And our model really is that we take the existing structure within any business and we teach them how to operate, as we call it, as a team of teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we do it by teaching the leaders how to behave differently, and teaching them how to build the trust and common purpose throughout the organization. And actually those two qualities are things you really find in elite small teams, like a startup, for example. And scaling that within the organization with what we call shared consciousness or sharing of information, so everybody has the context to make decisions at the lowest possible level.
Right.
When we were making decisions in the fight against Al Qaeda at the lowest level with the people closest to the problem, and they could marshal the resources and work together across teams faster than decisions can go up and down the chain, that's when we started winning.
Yeah. So going back to like you just did, going back to Al Qaeda,
Sure.
what were some interesting stories when fighting Al Qaeda?
Boy, I have a lot of those. When it comes to not working well together across teams or being too slow as an organization, there were several times when I first went to Afghanistan where we would go do a raid in the middle of the night. We'd fast rope in out of these helicopters on top of buildings, fight our way all the way down to the bottom floor of the building, apprehend the people we were going after, and we would find information through our interpreters and other people we had with us that could point us immediately to another target that might be half a mile away,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be a valley away. And instead of us immediately taking that information and making the decision there and marshaling all the resources there and saying we're going to that next one, we'd fly all the way back to then Bagram Air Base. We'd get all the information together and get it all perfectly organized, turn it into a report,
And it'd have to
It'd
go
go
up and
up
down.
the chain to at least another level, maybe two, before they then marshal another team, have them go through rehearsals, have them put together the perfect plan for the target. And by the time they'd go, everything would have changed and there was nobody there.
Yeah.
Okay. And that happened pretty often. It was very frustrating, as you can imagine. I mean, when you're losing, in some cases, we lost people on some of these raids.
Yeah.
And, if we would have just gone with taking more risk, you're actually reducing the risk in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
So taking more risk, not having the perfect plan, but going to that next target and gaining surprise might have been more helpful than, trying to reduce the risk up front.
Yeah. So let's see.
So the reason I'm bringing up risk is when I go into these businesses and we talk about empowering people closest to the problem,
Mm-hmm.
leaders have to learn how to assume more risk,
Yeah.
which in the long run actually reduces it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You just keep answering all these questions without me even having to ask them. I've skipped over at least 3 of them.
Well, sorry about that. You can dub those in.
I mean, you move so seamlessly through them that I don't even know if I can. Yeah.
Well, what questions do you have coming out of that? I mean, what are you thinking about? You can ask me some hard ones.
I don't even know, because that's like, I mean, it seems like how do you go from like military stuff just to business? Like that seems like a hard jump.
It is a hard jump, and that's a great question. The first thing is when I retired from the Army, I think I didn't work
Yeah.
for about a year and a half, right? And I had to go through my own transition of not being in charge of like 5,000 people and having helicopters at my beck and call to go wherever I want. I mean, that changes your brain chemistry,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I had to revert back to being a normal human being in society. And the easiest way for me to do that was to outright retire and spend a lot of time with family at home in Colorado, and also hike all over the mountains and
Mm-hmm.
spend time with the dogs. I think you remember we had, and so on.
Yeah.
And I also spent a lot of time just fixing up properties we had owned and selling those, and eventually consolidating to where we have this house here in Sonoma,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that was the first part of that transition. The next part was when General McChrystal, the guy who was running that special operations unit, and some people I'd worked with asked me to come be a partner at McChrystal Group because we had realized we had learned something in the war that would be helpful in business.
Mm-hmm.
Coincidentally, McChrystal was fired by President Obama over a Rolling Stone article where they'd let their guard down around a reporter who was traveling with them. And the McChrystal's running the war in Afghanistan, and this guy reported things that people on his staff were saying about Obama and Biden and so on.
Right.
So he was disgraced and fired as a 4-star general. And it took him some time also to come around to wanting to work in business.
Yeah.
But my first client I went to, my first day on the job, I flew from Colorado to Silicon Valley, and I started working with a company called Intuit.
Mm-hmm.
They do TurboTax and a number of other things. And they were smart enough to see what we could provide them. And we learned as much as we gave them in operating with Intuit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they'd put a company together where they realized there was a need for people to be able to automate, their tax returns and so on. They basically hired a bunch of accountants and they taught them how to code, right? And so you can imagine the coding was probably pretty shabby.
I mean, I can imagine.
But
after
they
my
knew what
coding
they were
class.
doing, right?
Yeah.
When it came to the taxes. But so when they took TurboTax and tried to put it together with other acquisitions of other companies, they couldn't communicate on one platform.
Right.
And their clients were having to go through several different websites and several different payment models and so on to be able to operate within Intuit.
Mm-hmm.
So we came in and we helped them to become one Intuit, kind of the way that we became one JSOC without the SEALs and Rangers and so on all competing,
Mm-hmm.
but working on the same common purpose to be able to deliver in a consistent way across.
Right.
And so what it was surprising to me and what I learned in that transition was how few people, leaders in business, have to actually be part of their staff and help them think through problems. They're really Spartan in the way that they've resourced. They don't have the taxpayers paying for huge staffs and so on like we did in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to help them think through a lot of problem solving in a way that we wouldn't have to in the military.
Sorry,
Yeah.
the mic keeps falling down.
Sure.
One quick question I have too is just for context, what does McChrystal Group actually do?
Yeah, what we do is we help companies execute on their strategies. I mean, that's the easiest way to say it.
Okay.
And we do that by coming in and doing an organizational diagnostic where we see how they're operating along trust, common purpose, shared consciousness, and empowered execution, right? And we do a network analysis and we see how information flows in the organization. And if we see that there are bottlenecks in terms of certain people or teams where all the information or all the decision making is stuck there,
Mm-hmm.
That's what we show the client on how we can help them to be able to execute a lot faster than their competition and to be able to adapt a lot faster to what's changing within their organization and outside of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just strategy and streamlining.
Yeah, I mean, and we help them to change how they operate, so they're not just a big hierarchy, but they're operating more like a network within
Hmm.
that hierarchy. If we do it right, people in the lower parts of the organization that are closest to their clients or that are closest to the problems that the organization's having executing their strategies know enough and are trusted enough to be able to make decisions at their level without it going all the way to the top.
Hmm.
That's when we know we're doing a good job.
All right.
Okay.
Well, that seems like a good place to wrap it up because we've gone from high school to military to
Sure.
business.
Sounds good.
So thank you for coming on, and thank you for doing your barn talk. And that's going to be it this week. So thanks for watching. Which camera are we on? Camera one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.